Welcome to the MSI Lunch Lecture Series. My name is Earl Taylor, Chief Knowledge Officer at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, MSI helps marketers become better marketers. Our business and academic thought leaders collaborate to create new marketing knowledge, which we share in a variety of ways. One of the most popular is this online lecture series. Those of you attending today represent many business sectors such as consumer durables, manufacturing, travel, and financial services, as well as MSI members like Ford, Kantar, DuPont, Nike, and others. So we're delighted to welcome you to learn more about mastering multi-channel distribution. Now, before we begin, I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have during the presentation. We'll gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Kusum Ailawadi is a Charles Jordan Professor of Marketing at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. Her expertise is in strategic interaction and distribution of power between manufacturers and their retailers, and she uses large databases as well as proprietary data from companies to study the impact of promotion and private labels and performance of manufacturers and retailers, and to examine consumer, competitor, and retailer response to major marketing policy changes. Kusum's work has been published widely in major marketing journals, and she's a recipient of numerous Best Paper Awards, including most recently the recipient of MSI's own H. Paul Root Award. Her work has also appeared in practitioner journals such as the Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. She's working on a research-based book for managers on managing multi-channel distribution. She'll tell us more about that, I think, at the end of her talk. And we're very pleased to have Kusum as one of our academic trustees as well. So with that, Kusum, we'll turn it over to you to tell us about managing multi-channel distribution.
Thank you so much, Earl, for that nice introduction. And everybody who signed on today, thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. So as Earl said, I'm working on this book, and I thought what I would do today is share with you some of the themes from this work that I'm doing jointly with my good friend and colleague Paul Ferris from the Darden School at the University of Virginia. We've been reading about, researching, writing about, and teaching about these issues for a while, and we wanted to bring it together in this book that we've almost wrapped up. So let me start with the parenthetic exclamatory statement in the title that I chose for today's webinar, the one about yes, multi. Omnichannel retailers. Look, retailers want to be omnichannel, right? They have consumers like me who go to their stores or have their apps or go to their website and maybe even look at their holiday special catalog. And they want to give me a seamless experience no matter where I interact with them, no matter where I buy, where I browse, where I return. The suppliers whose products these omni-channel retailers sell also are in multiple different channels. And in this case, here's a consumer, my colleague Paul Ferris. And these suppliers reach consumers like Paul Ferris through many different independent channels. For Nike, it might be Roadrunner Sports and other such large specialty retailers. It might be the more general sporting goods chains like Foot Locker. They're now on Amazon. And, of course, they have had their flagship stores, Nike Town, for a long time. They're heavily investing in their direct-to-consumer website as well as their new sneakers app. These are all of the different channels and many more that they reach the consumer through. Can these suppliers give Paul an omni-channel experience irrespective of which of these different distribution channels he shops at? Probably not. Should they even aspire to do something like that? Have the same services, the same kind of experience, the same product line, pricing across these different independent channels? For some companies, maybe so. For many others, most probably not. So the perspective of a supplier in my view, is at least of necessity and also often by choice, one of navigating multiple independent channels. Some of those channel members, maybe many of them today, might themselves be omnichannel, and so dealing with and addressing and satisfying the needs of those omnichannel partners may be part of their toolkit, but only a part of it. And so that's a distinction between omnichannel and multichannel that I wanted to start with. Look, in this world of distribution today, online is absolutely center stage, right? Whether it's suppliers going direct or our, the big everything store. But while it's center stage, online, I believe, is far from the whole story. Think about Hasbro at the demise of Toys R Us, struggling to find thousands of new brick-and-mortar outlets from which to reach their consumers, especially as the holidays draw near. Think even of companies that started as digital natives, Blue Apron, The Honest Company, Bonobos. These are companies whose reason for being was e-commerce, was online distribution. And each of these today is finding that they not only need a presence in, but in many cases really have to master the brick-and-mortar distribution channel. Blue Apron is getting on Costco's shelves. Jessica Alba, when she founded The Honest Company, said that she did not believe that household personal products belonged in grocery stores, that grocery stores should be for perishables. But today the company is investing a great deal of energy in trying to get on grocery store shelves, drugstore shelves, etc. Bonobos has its own guide shops that it's opening, but it is also selling some of its products with independent retailers like Nordstrom. So distribution today is definitely both about online and bricks and mortar. It continues to be that way. But while it's not the whole story, online is definitely exacerbating the root causes of conflict in the channel that have always occurred. It's making those much worse. Distribution channel partners always have the problem of uncoordinated pricing and effort. Each party makes decisions of pricing or selling effort and all their other decisions based on what is good for their profitability, not necessarily what is good for the whole system. That creates problems. Issues of under and especially today over distribution are a really important part of source of friction. You get into new online distribution channels that makes your traditional brick and mortar retailers uncomfortable, to say the least. You go direct and start to compete with your customers. That is a really big source of conflict. In the world of online, as more and more intermediaries slide themselves into the space between suppliers and their end consumers, performing ever more specialized and narrow functions, the question of who's doing how much work and what pay they deserve for it is again becoming extremely fractious. And of course, in all of this, the question is, where does the future lie? The traditional retailers are thinking about what role, if any, they will have to play in the future as suppliers navigate all the different channels of distribution for them. So this is a difficult balance. You're here because you think this is I'm assuming because you know and realize that it's a difficult balance. You need to get the type of distribution right. You need to get the intensity of that distribution right. That's what distribution breadth refers to. If distribution breadth gets either too far ahead or too far behind where demand is, you're going to have a problem with the performance of your retail partners, how well the retailers perform for you, and really their perception of how well you perform for them as a brand. There are all kinds of feedback loops between these things, which we marketing academics spend a great deal of effort trying to unravel and estimate. If estimating them is hard, then managing them is even harder. The other aspect of distribution is distribution depth. How well is your brand presented, priced, supported by your distribution channel partners? You get distribution breadth to go too far, and the retailers will compete their margins away and find themselves cutting down on the investments that they make in your brand. So all of this needs to be balanced. And my view is I'm going to say that the balance here has to be done sort of with these 3 M's. First one is you've got to measure distribution and performance. You need the right metrics. I know it sounds trite, but you've got to measure something before you can manage it. The second, the really challenging piece is how do you get this thing in balance? How do you match distribution with demand? And then even if you've been able to get to the approximate Goldilocks level and type of distribution, there is still the ongoing challenge of managing your product line, adjusting demand with your consumer pull efforts, putting in place policies for your channel, and monitoring those policies to make sure that the system works right. Let me start with metrics, and I'll probably only have time today to talk to you about some metrics as well as some conversation on the matching of distribution with demand. So let's start with metrics. Distribution breadth metrics, these are things we know. Right? We've used these forever and ever. How many outlets do we have that stock our brands? How important are those outlets? We weigh outlets very commonly in the CPG world, but increasingly in other industries too. We weigh outlets by how important they are, how much they sell of all commodities, how much they sell of our product category, how much traffic they get from the target segment that we are interested in. And of course, how many stocking outlets you have determines how easy they are to find. These were the metrics of the bricks and mortar world. Some of these still stay relevant in the online world, some not so much, and we need some new metrics in the online world. For example, today we need to measure the importance of outlets not just by ACV and PCV, but also by the gross merchandise value of outlets such as online marketplaces. GMV is basically the online marketplace analog of ACV. Increasingly, we need to think not only about how important outlets are with respect to how much of our product category is purchased there, but also how much of our product category is searched for there. What is the percentage of search volume that occurs at these different sites determines for us how important they are and therefore whether we should be in them or not. Increasingly online, distribution coverage is not as much about how many different places you're in. In fact, it's not at all about how many different places you're in, but how findable those places are, how findable those sites are. One metric, for example, that we are increasingly following to say, look, if the consumer comes searching for a product category online, what percentage of the outlets that show up above the fold on the results page, whether it's on the search engine or on Amazon or wherever else, stock your outlet, stock your brand? And you need to think about what are the relevant keywords that you're interested in strategically. So let me give you a little bit more on what I mean by these kinds of findability distribution metrics online. So here's a radar chart. It basically shows several running shoe brands. And what you see here is, read this chart as, for example, across the 10 highest volume category keywords, these are upper funnel, broad category keywords, running shoes, best running shoes for women, trail running shoes, etc. For these highest category keywords, what percentage of the sites that show up on the search engine results page in the organic section stock Nike? Well, in this case, we found that 93% of them stock Nike. So this gives you a measure of distribution coverage for Nike online. The rest of these things are what percentage of sponsored sites that show up stock the brand, what percentage of the product listing ads on Google stock the brand, all measures of distribution coverage that, one, we need to track, and two, interestingly, are becoming increasingly easy for us to track. the question that I'll leave you with on this issue is whether this is a measure of distribution or a measure of advertising. Because, of course, your appearance on the search engine results page, especially on the sponsored side of things, is at least in large part, a function of how much you spend on search advertising. But as I said, when you think about distribution coverage online, it's really all about findability, not about how many places stock you. So in one sense, you might think, well, this is just semantics. How does it matter whether we call it distribution or advertising? But what I will say to you is that from a strategic point of view, it's important how you think about this. When you estimate your marketing mix models today to try to understand the effects of different aspects of your marketing mix on sales and share and other measures of performance, if you estimate a search advertising elasticity, should you be putting that in the context of traditional media advertising and in assessing how small or big its magnitude is? Or should you be assessing it compared to your distribution elasticity to assess how effective it is? Distribution elasticities, we know, are orders of magnitude bigger than traditional media advertising. So it's important how we think about these things. Here's an example of distribution depth metrics. So I'm showing you here a metric for the same running shoes in a similar radar chart, where what you see in front of you is, again, across the same 10 highest volume category keywords that I use just to illustrate this, what percentage of the sites that show up in the organic search section have Nike on the landing page? How easy is it to see Nike on the website? That's a measure of distribution depth. Similarly, the rest of the portions of this chart show you the same kind of metrics for sponsored sites, for product listing ads, and so on. And you can see here that the better the distribution depth of the brand, it actually makes the brand easier to find because you'll end up higher on the organic search results as well. So these things are all really intertwined, which brings me back to this notion of we've got metrics. By the way, I'm skipping past metrics of performance because we've only got an hour today. Let me just say before I go on to the next theme here that there is a big alphabet soup of the kinds of performance metrics that we should be looking at, both for our retail distribution channel partners and for ourselves. I wish I could tell you that there are one or two or even three metrics that are all important. What I'm actually going to say to you that is not the case at all, that it would be foolish to try and find one or two silver bullet metrics. I think it's much better for us to recognize and embrace the complexity of distribution today and realize that as we assess the performance implications of different aspects of our distribution strategy, we need to track, monitor, and follow multiple different metrics. And what might be more important than reducing the number of metrics is simply to try and organize them in some sort of hierarchy. But let me take you to my next theme here, which is the sticky question of matching distribution with demand. We try to optimize the marketing mix. Those of you who are in your company's marketing analytics groups, those of you who are academics, do that. We try to do that all the time with advertising, with promotion. That is a darn hard thing to do with distribution. Why is optimizing distribution so difficult? Well, for one, you don't control it. Just because you want it doesn't mean you get it. And interestingly, the stronger you are as a brand, the more willing your consumers are to search for you, something that we call consumer search loyalty. Perversely, the easier it is for you to get the distribution, and really the less you need it. In fact, the stronger your consumer search loyalty, the smaller your distribution elasticity is going to be, because as you expand distribution coverage, you are reaching at least some of the consumers who were already looking for your brand wherever it was available and buying it there. So the incremental sales that you get are actually lower than if you were a brand where consumers only bought it once they saw it, where they regularly shopped. There are interactions and feedback effects between distribution breadth and depth, between performance and depth and breadth, between other marketing mix variables and distribution, which, as I said, are difficult to measure, hard to estimate, and even harder to manage. Distribution costs are much more complex than the cost of advertising, for example, or even promotion. Think about it. As if you serve large wholesale and retail customers, they can stretch out your payables, they can impose all kinds of deductions, which they can require that you use their logistics systems, which all represent large financial as well as other costs. If you're selling to small dispersed retailers, the servicing cost to reach those retailers can be extremely high relative to the revenue stream that each of those individual small retailers provide. So distribution costs don't increase smoothly. They increase lumpily, and they're very complex. And if you want to talk about optimization, then costs is an integral part of that analysis. Distribution expansion also doesn't happen evenly, right? It happens lumpily. You add Walmart, and even if Walmart doesn't put you in all of their stores, which they probably will not, at least for starters, you're going to get a very large, significant bump in distribution coverage, by no means a small expansion. You get into a Walmart or an Amazon, and it will also potentially be perceived as signaling a shift in your strategy to your competitors, to your existing distribution channel partners, even to consumers. And that is going to create a series of reactions that are really hard to codify, even in the complicated econometric and structural models that we develop these days. So very, very hard to try and get the right balance of distribution coverage. We need some simple tools. Well, let me show you one simple tool. A simple thing like a velocity graph can reveal some sustainable combinations of distribution coverage and market share. What's a velocity graph? Nothing complicated. Just a cross-sectional plot of the distribution of different brands and their market performance. You might use different metrics of distribution. Here I'm showing you a stylistic graph, a stylistic velocity graph with a brand's ACV or PCV distribution on the x-axis and its market share on the y-axis. You can see this is a convex curve. It almost always is a convex curve for lots of very good reasons that have been written about. But essentially, what I want to show you here is that these cross-sectional locations of distribution and market share represent what might be sustainable equilibrium for these brands. So each of these stars is a brand. If you're a brand that is on or close to this velocity graph, you probably have some sustainable combination of distribution and market share. If, on the other hand, you are a brand that is this red cross that is way below the velocity graph, the odds are high that you are over-distributed. You need to grow demand, or it's very likely that your distribution partners' performance metrics are not looking good to them. Their turns, their gross margin return on inventory, their sales per square foot for your brand are not likely looking very attractive, and you might lose distribution. On the other hand, if you're a green way above the velocity graph, you are likely under-distributed. You have the momentum, and this is a good time to use that momentum to grow distribution, or you might lose that opportunity to competitors. Now, it's not quite as simple, of course, because there are brands that can sustain, that can live and thrive off the velocity graph. But you need to think about, if you are one of those brands, why that is happening. For example, you might have a special great logistics system, direct-to-store delivery, that makes it worthwhile for the retailer to keep you on the shelf because they don't have to spend the money and the effort to put you in their warehouse. And so even if your turns are not that high, they don't mind giving you some shelf space. It could be that your brand appeals to a very small but very highly loyal and valuable group of consumers who the retailer is not willing to lose, and that would be to your advantage. But those are more exceptions than the rule, and so these velocity graphs really help give you a sense for what combination of distribution and market share works, and therefore what's at least an approximate level of distribution that might be the right coverage for you. I showed you a stylistic graph before. This is actually a real velocity graph for the laundry detergent category. And you can see, again, this is PCV distribution on the x-axis and market share on the y-axis, very convex curve. You've got brands like Dreft and Ivory Snow sitting way below the curve that really need to worry about whether they are going to be able to sustain that high level of distribution or not. Of course, different metrics of distribution give you different shaped curves. This is a curve where the distribution metric is total distribution. Total distribution, to those of you in the CPG world, will sound very familiar. For those outside of that world, let me just say it's a simple way to think about total distribution is essentially the number of SKUs, the number of items in the product category that you have in distribution. So here again, Tide detergent is by far has the highest amount of total distribution. That 4,500 is essentially on a weighted average basis that Tide has 45 SKUs in distribution. You can see that the plot here is much tighter, and that's because a retailer is much more likely to kick off a few of your SKUs from the shelf if they're not moving fast enough than they are to kick the entire brand off the shelf. So it's not as easy to sustain off the curve on total distribution, whereas you might, at least for a while, be able to sustain off the curve when it comes to total brand distribution. So let me make sure that I don't lose you lose the forest for the trees, as they say. We are talking here about getting to the right level of distribution. We're talking about optimizing distribution and how hard it is. So what I will say to you is these simple velocity graphs are a nice simple way to get to the approximately right ballpark. Then you can fine-tune with marketing mix models and estimates of distribution elasticity. Those marketing mix models, by the way, need to be expanded so that we cover the effects of distribution, of physical distribution, not just on sales and share in physical outlets, but also in online sales. We need to unpack where people are buying their first trial products and where they're buying their repeat products. We'll see a little bit more of why I'm saying that in just a moment. But keep in mind that there's a big difference between increasing coverage in one channel or format and getting into a whole new one. And that takes me into online distribution. So here's a map, and I know you can't see all of the detail clearly, but what the map shows you is for one company, the yellows are dots where they're independent retail store, where they have independent retail distribution, brick and mortar distribution. The blue is where they are getting online sales as they've opened up online distribution channels. And then there are a few, 2 or 3 or 4 company flagship stores that you probably can't see, but those are distributed around the map too. What does this tell you? At least if you can't see the detail, you can certainly see that the blues and the yellows kind of stick together. The online sales are showing up very close to where the independent retail stores are. So do clicks fill holes in distribution, as we often hope that they would do? Or do they leverage the bricks? Do they leverage the physical stores that act as billboards and help increase online and therefore total sales? Or do they cannibalize those sales? This is something that we as researchers in academics and as marketers need to really understand as we grow our online distribution. So got to get online distribution right. The slope, it's a really slippery slope. The trade-off, there's always a trade-off between coverage and control. But there's a very slippery slope between coverage and control when you go online. And so the considerations you need to keep in mind are, and I'll start with the bottom of my slide here and reveal it to you. You need to understand what the consumer's search loyalty is. What do they search for? Where do they search for it? You need to figure out how and what level of control you are going to have over your brand and its pricing. You need to think about work and pay for intermediaries, and especially online, you need to wonder whether that new channel is going to have a viable revenue and profit model. So you start there, but if we want to get online distribution right, we need a deep understanding of who it is we are targeting online. So go back to that map I showed you for a moment and think about it. So are we trying to get to the current market segment who already buys our brand and who is now buying the brand online some of the time for some of their purchases? Are we trying to get an additional segment without physical store access? Are we filling holes in brick and mortar distribution? Or are we trying to get to additional segments who basically just do all of their searching and buying or most of it online, and we wouldn't have them in our physical stores? The truth is probably a little bit of all of this, but we do need to try and understand which segments are the most important ones that you're trying to get to. And the answer to that who, the deep answer to that who, will try, and in addition, an answer to why these segments go online. They don't just go for the best price. They may be going to get good product information and get a wide selection of your products. They might be going simply because it's so convenient and easy to order and get delivery at home. They may be going because online is the search costs are low and one-stop comparison shopping is something they really care about and get online. They may be going for product reviews. They may be going because they want to bundle up a whole bunch of many different products that they can't easily do online, or, as is often happening, they may want to unbundle products. Think of what cable companies today and for the last several years are suffering with cord cutters who've decided they don't want to bundle up all the channels that they pay for and never watch. So understanding these different segments and understanding why they shop online then helps you decide where you need to be online. It may be that if all the segments you're interested in are caring about is getting the best price, getting the best product information and the wide selection that they need out of your brand with convenient ordering, hey, maybe your own website and a few omni-channel partners are all you need. But delivery is not cheap, and setting up the logistics to make that at least not be a drain on profitability means that you may need to rely on online suppliers like Amazon. One-stop and comparison shopping means that you certainly cannot rely just on going direct. You may need third-party marketplaces at Amazon, at Jet, and other places. If people are coming in for reviews, they might get those reviews at some of these other sites, but they may also come to, if you're a travel company, a meta-search site like TripAdvisor. So the point that I want to try to make here is going online is not a question of whether, but it is a question of how, and the loss in control that you can suffer by not doing that carefully can really wreak havoc on your distribution system and on your brand. And so this careful way of understanding who, why, and where, I think would really help. Let me give you some examples of these considerations. So I said consumer search loyalty. Let me show, I'm staying here with the example of running shoes, which is one of the cases that we've developed in our book. Look, this is easy, inexpensive, cheap market research. If you look on Google Trends, for what are the top queries, the most highly searched queries for related to running shoes, here's what you see as the most high volume queries. Nike, Nike running, Nike shoes, Nike running shoes, etc. Then you have some generic product category, upper funnel search terms, shoes for running, best running shoes, etc. And then you have Brooks, ASICS, lots of branded search, especially at the high volumes. The question, it is important for you to understand this, both so you know what the consumer is searching for, how high you rank in their search loyalty, but also to get an understanding of just what you need to do if you want to satisfy those consumers who are doing branded search and looking for your brand online. All you need to do is harvest that demand, and it's not so much about creating new demand, generating new demand online. Of course, you need to think about, well, where did that search begin? Did it begin on Google, or is it increasingly beginning on Amazon, in which case maybe I need to be on Amazon? Well, once you start thinking about your online distribution partners, then here's the issue of control over brand and price. Let me show you here. I'm going to show you these one at a time, but I'll start with this first chart. Nike, as we all know, is now on Amazon. Sometime in the last year or so, they decided to do business with Amazon. This chart is showing you the maximum and minimum prices that we found for a few of Nike's models on Amazon before Nike's partnership with Amazon. So Nike did not officially sell on Amazon, nor did its authorized resellers, but that didn't mean Nike was not available on Amazon. There were plenty of possibly unauthorized resellers on Amazon. And you see pretty large dispersion of price. So lots of things being sold on full price, but lots being sold on discounted prices. Here is ASICS, another running shoe brand that had at this time and continues to have a different partnership with Amazon. They sell their product to Amazon directly using the first-party model. And you see plenty of price dispersion for them as well. And then here's another brand of running shoes, Brooks Running Shoes, that at this time was doing business with Amazon as a third-party reseller, and then you see the much tighter dispersion of prices. So Brooks was able to successfully create much more control over its brand and its price on Amazon, being a third-party supplier. Presumably, Nike now being on Amazon has at least in part the objective of trying to reduce this price dispersion and to get more control over its brand online and particularly on Amazon. The final consideration I'll talk about briefly is this notion of work and pay, right? Look, everybody wants to cut out the middleman today. Even the middleman wants to cut out the middleman. This is a picture that one of my colleagues took at a Trader Joe's. But direct channels are expensive. One-stop comparison shopping is alive, well, and even in the world of costless search online, still extremely important. This is the travel industry, which is another case that we develop in our book. What I'm showing you here is the traffic of unique visitors to travel intermediaries like Booking and TripAdvisor and Hotels.com on the left side, and unique visitors to hotelbrand.com websites on the right-hand side. And you see that order of magnitude difference in traffic. There's a lot of research to be done here about why that is so, but the fact is that this is the difference, and at least one of the reasons for this difference is that we as consumers like to have a one-stop comparison shop. But going direct also requires you to expand your scope. Think AT&T as it's prepping up its direct streaming channels, it's finding that it needs to expand access to content. Think about Coach, buying Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman, and even changing its name to Tapestry, because as they reduce their dependence on department stores and try to push their direct online as well as their own stores, they find that they need to have a broader selection of product categories to get people into their stores. And it requires a great deal of investment in consumer pull and in logistics. Think about the Marriott-SPG merger. It's often said that at least one of the reasons why more and more of these hotel companies are merging and consolidating is to try and make the direct-to-consumer channel more viable. So these are expensive things, and margins, while you might get the highest margin if you cut out the middleman, margins tell only a small part of the story. We need to really think about all of the costs involved in going direct. I'm not saying the direct channel is not something you should use. I'm just saying we need to go into the direct channel with our eyes wide open. So you do need channel partners, even online, but sweat the details. I knew I wouldn't have the opportunity to go through this because I want to make sure I leave some time for conversation and questions. But the details on what part of your product line gets sold where, what kinds of vertical restraints you put in place in terms of pricing and maps and resale price maintenance, what kind of promotional allowances you provide or don't provide in the form of marketing support, what kinds of constraints you put on your independent channel partners on which keywords they should and should not bid on online, who takes care of inventory and fulfillment, who's responsible for returns, who is responsible for culling unauthorized sellers, who gets the customer data and the relationship. These details are all important in trying to figure out exactly what that online distribution particularly should be. So I'll close with, again, the reminder that this managing distribution in multiple different channels is a complicated thing. It's something we have to do, but you measure, you match, and you manage. The ongoing management has to occur. That's the piece that I haven't spoken to you about today. But at this point, let me stop and see if you have some questions or comments for me.
Thanks very much, Kusum. That's great. We do have some questions that are coming in. I wanted to start with one that was early on in your presentation. You were talking about the breadth and depth metrics. And one of the viewers was asking how you actually develop those metrics. Is that, for example, a percentage of locations that would carry a given brand, Nike, or are those typically just percent, like share of market, share of distribution? Could you just elaborate a bit on how you actually define those metrics of breadth and depth?
Sure. So let me first answer the question about physical distribution, breadth and depth. So the simplest metrics are if there are, let's say you sell the category of athletic footwear. What are all of the different retail outlets in a market that carry athletic footwear? The simplest measure is what percentage of them carry your brand. That's numeric distribution. The simplest, but probably the least insightful, because what might happen is you get a whole bunch of really small retailers who don't count for very much, and the big guys don't carry your brand, and then your numeric metrics might look good. So what we do is we weight the outlets by what percentage of athletic footwear each of them sells. So if there are 200 outlets in a market and your product is carried in 100 of them, you've got 100% numeric distribution. But if those 100 outlets account for only 50% of total athletic footwear, or they account for 80% of athletic footwear, that changes your PCV or your ACV distribution, depending upon how important those outlets are, right? I know I'm not saying this very clearly. So what percentage of total athletic footwear sales are accounted for by outlets that carry your brand? That's PCV distribution. But the point that I was making was that online distribution is really about findability, and that's about what percentage of the outlets that sell athletic footwear show up on the top of the search engine results page and carry your brand. That's findability, distribution breadth online.
I think that does help clarify those definitions. Thanks. And it's actually a great transition into a question I wanted to raise, and it goes back to what I think is one of the key concepts you presented, the notion of consumer search loyalty. In some respects, that represents a kind of a blurring of the distinction between distribution and advertising, as I think you pointed out at several points. As you said, if you're so widely known as a brand that you don't need to pay for or engage in the usual ways of getting your distribution out there, it'll sort of sell itself, especially when they can find you online. So it's easier to get distribution when you're a well-known brand, but you may have less of a need for it. And that points up, I think, the sort of advertising or signaling value of the brand to the marketplace beyond just how we think about traditional advertising. So maybe comment a little bit more about that. As far as you know, in the work you've done with companies, are they beginning to sort of look at this in combination? In other words, that there is a trade-off between the strength of the brand in promoting awareness and online search and so forth versus the strength of the brand getting us into distribution outlets, which is the more traditional leveraging, perhaps?
Yes, and I think the answer to that question is that the strength of the brand in leveraging the strength of the brand to get distribution is something that companies have always realized. And the challenge there is, in fact, one of over-distribution. If you're a strong brand and retailers are really vying to get you on their shelves because they know that if the consumer comes to your site and doesn't find that strong brand, there's the danger that they might go elsewhere looking for it. So retailers want to carry your brand, and the danger can become that unless you discipline yourself, your distribution coverage gets too broad. And as that distribution coverage gets really broad, now retailers are finding that the consumer says, I can find this brand next door as well. Let me check the price out there. What is the price there? And then they find themselves competing with one another and bringing down the prices of the brand, which is not good for the brand, and bringing down their own margins, which is not good for them. And the inevitable downward slide there is that at some point they find themselves finding they need to carry the brand, but they don't really want to sell it because they're not making very much money on it. So companies are increasingly realizing that this happens especially online, that they need to control the distribution of their brand and rely on the fact that consumers do have search loyalty. Of course, it depends upon where the consumer is searching, as I said. So if the consumer is searching on Google, all you need perhaps is to invest in a consumer poll, and you know that the consumer is going to come and search for you. And as long as I put in Nike running shoes and I get 2 or 3 websites up on top, that's all I need to have, in effect, 100% distribution coverage online. So that's the trade-off. But of course, if the consumer is not doing their search on Google and the consumer is doing their search on Amazon, now you start to feel pressure to be on Amazon. So it's not new that companies realize they can leverage their brand name for distribution breadth, but it's just that today we need to think about advertising and distribution online almost interchangeably, one doing the job of the other.
That's great, and your example of Amazon is, I think, a good one because in its origins, it really was all about distribution. You could find your product, you knew what you're looking for, you found it, you can get a good deal on Amazon, and now, as you pointed out, they're actually becoming the start point for search and or an advertising platform in their own right. There are a couple of questions, I think, related to what you were just sharing, kind of flipping it around to say, if you're a startup brand, not as well-known, not as strong as some of the brands like Nike that you use as examples, what are the implications of this balancing today? What would your advice be if you're a startup brand in terms of the balance of online and offline distribution versus sort of more traditional advertising awareness?
So in some ways, I think it's a little bit easier today for startup brands than it used to be, because certainly opening up a website is easy. The ramifications of executing delivery and so on from that website are not so easy, but opening up a presence online is easy. And if you can invest in very targeted consumer pull advertising online, then you can start to get some traffic to your website. But basically, it is for these small startup brands that online marketplaces like Amazon and Jet become extremely valuable, because you don't have your own consumer search loyalty yet, but you do need the traffic, and that traffic is strong on these online marketplaces. So those are great places for startup companies to start to put their brands. There is of course the worry that as your brand grows, Amazon will sort of take on the inventory themselves and start to sell the brand themselves and start to compete with you. But as a startup, you have more options online today than you used to. It is so much harder still to get on a physical shelf than it is to get on an online marketplace.
That's a good point, actually, and I was going to ask, kind of amplify that. The ability to find a startup brand like that, a lot of companies will start out with trying to target influencers or a certain demographic segment. It might be a fashion item of some kind that is becoming popular, and then try to get the message out through social media and other non-traditional channels. Maybe just, it goes a little bit beyond your presentation, but just reflect perhaps the role of social media influencer marketing in this new environment of the combination of on and offline. It would seem like that is another opportunity maybe for less well-known brands to play and maybe come to some more prominence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, Earl, I'll make a little bit more of a semantic distinction here. We hear the word multi-channel marketing a lot. I was very careful today to use the word multi-channel distribution because my focus was on talking about distribution channels. But of course, multi-channel marketing, reaching the consumer where they want you, when they are ready for you, be it in social media or other traditional places on blogs or whatever. That's this notion of multi-channel marketing, and certainly these are opportunities where companies can creatively, at relatively low cost, start to reach networks of people, and they're making use of online word of mouth, making use of peer recommendations. Again, allows a small consumer pull budget to go much farther than it used to be able to go.
One question that, again, is a little more speculative, but perhaps get your thoughts about this. There has been some discussion about if and when the sort of voice ordering, the Alexa and so forth, becomes more and more widespread, that consumers may just say, Alexa, send me detergent, or Alexa, send me diapers, or whatever. And it may not be a branded search. It may not, the brands may be relatively less important. On the other hand, as I think some of your examples pointed out, the almost generic association some people have between a given brand like a Nike and running shoes or Kleenex and tissues and so forth may actually mean that brands are as or more valuable than ever. So just your thoughts about the relative importance of brand in this environment, especially with voice search and ordering, if and when that becomes widespread.
Absolutely. So actually, I only showed a couple of the new metrics that we're proposing, but one of the metrics for distribution depth that we propose is, hey, are you on voice search? Because to the extent that a young family tells Alexa to order everything from gummy bears for the kids to paper towels for the house, or running shoes, for the runner in the family. If you're not up there on the voice search, then you're never going to be able to get into the consideration set. So that's really a new measure of distribution depth that brands really need to be concerned about. And yes, like you said, Earl, if you're the kind of brand that is so closely associated with the product category that somebody might actually say, get me Bounty instead of paper towels, or Kleenex instead of facial tissues, then you're in great shape. But otherwise, Alexa and other smart speakers, other of these voice search tools, have an immense amount of leverage in deciding which brands get to be on top there. and get offered to the consumer. This is actually an important place for private label if you think about Amazon and its experimentation with so many different private label brands and its ability to be able to put those high up on voice search. So yes, if you're not a well-known brand and you don't get on voice search, then the issue of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer gets even more exacerbated. Just as a little bit of an aside, I think this is a paper by Avi Goldfarb and some of his colleagues. I can't remember the exact citation, but sometime last year or the year before, one of the interesting insights from the paper was that if you're a brand that is hard to pronounce, you might actually lose out on voice search because the consumer either may hesitate to say the name of the brand because they don't know how to say it, or Alexa might not understand what it is. And so even things like how difficult the brand name is to pronounce might start to become important in this era of voice search.
That's a great, nice kind of upbeat note to end on. I think the marketers in the audience can be thinking about how do people pronounce my brands? How many ways are there to misspell or mispronounce it? This has been really great, Kusum. Thanks so much. I want to thank our audience also for being here for this event. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar soon, and if you have additional questions, you can follow up with Kusum at kusum.l.ailawadi@tuck.dartmouth.edu. And just want to remind the audience that since 1961, nonprofit MSI has brought together the best minds in marketing from major corporations and top business schools around the world to improve business practice by applying science to marketing's biggest challenges. So thanks again to Kusum and to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you at our next luncheon webinar series.